Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, and I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on.
For as long as there have been babies born into this world, mankind has wondered about how life begins and develops in the womb.
This is your bladder, and this is your baby right here. He's jumping for you. Look at him.
Wow, I can't believe how developed he is. Look at him move.
Yeah, he's been well developed since 8 weeks. He's had all his parts. Look at him. Oh, look at you.
How come I can't feel that?
You won't until the 4th month, but he's been moving in there since 8 weeks. He's got a whole lot of room in the womb to move. And with all that fluid, they're able to move around, do somersaults, you know. Look at them. Do you believe it? You're going to have your hands full, girl. Look at that.
The birth of a human life occurs at the moment of conception, when the mother's egg or ovum is fertilized by one of the father's sperm. During this act of conception, the two cells become a single living cell, a unique individual who never existed before in history and will never be duplicated again. Its heart begins to beat on about day 18.
This is an image of just 4 weeks. Can you see the heart beating? Listen to the Doppler of that heart.
They decided to create an environment where they would convince the blacks to severely limit the number of children they were going to have, and thereby commit race suicide.
We have now reached a point in this country that the abortion industry at this point kills as many African American people every 4 days as the Klan killed in 150 years. And you can truly say the most dangerous place for an African American to be is in the womb of their African American mother.
Hello everyone, welcome to Love Them Both. Today's show is going to be part 2 of People Concerned for the Unborn Child's Education Day at Synod Hall, taped at Synod Hall in Oakland, and it's called Youth and the Sex Time Bomb, part 2. I titled it that way because for middle and high school and post-high school students, aged people, the world is deceptively portraying sex to us as something that's harmless, that's exciting, that's fun, and in reality that's the opposite of the truth. All that glitters is not gold, and it will become a time bomb to backfire on you, to hurt you when sex is not used according to God's commandments. On our screen, you will see a pregnancy helpline if you're pregnant and scared, if you're suffering the sorrow and guilt of an abortion, if you're interested in adoption, the caring option, you want to consider that. You can call the helpline. It's nationwide, 24 hours. They'll direct you, they'll put you in touch with a free and confidential counselor near you, and Pregnancy Resource Center too. You'll also see the Health and Human Services Trafficking Hotline. If trafficking, women and children particularly, girls are being forced into prostitution in plain sight. It's going on everywhere. It's probably going on under your nose in your neighborhood. If you suspect someone, a young girl or woman being trafficked, you can call the Health and Human Services Trafficking Hotline. It's secure and confidential, and find advice as to how you should proceed with this situation where you might help a person. If someone's life seems to be threatened, if you believe someone's life is in danger, you can call your local police. Our world's troubles are increasing. There is Islamic strife in the Middle East between the Shiites and the Sunnis, and the ISIS and Boko Haram group in Nigeria, attempt to violently take over these countries and force them into Islam. Islam is not a religion of peace. This show, the anchor issue of this show is abortion and human trafficking too now, and these are the result of moral deterioration that abortion and human trafficking, that is forcing women into providing sexual services, as a result of a demand generated by pornographic type of sexual lust or obsession by men willing to pay money for it. And you will have also, now we're having forced in on us homosexual so-called marriage. And this is only going to make matters worse. You know, in the pornographic heterosexual lust of abortion and human trafficking were brought to mind the city of Pompeii that was destroyed out of the sky by volcanic gases and ash in 79 AD. This is God's judgment. This was God's judgment on a city that was so openly pornographic that I am told, that they can't even show at a library some of the relics that were retrieved from Pompeii. They were so obscene, they have to be kept in a vault. Well, likewise, in the Bible, God gave the example of Sodom and Gomorrah, a once for all time example of what happens to a society when it normalizes homosexuality. The very word sodomy is from Sodom and Gomorrah. This is all a very real thing. We shouldn't try to deny these historical examples, one for homosexual lust, the other for heterosexual lust in Pompeii. What I'm trying to show on this show is the road to sanity, that the Ten Commandments are the road to sanity, moral sanity. It will start to give us some satisfaction in life, some accomplishment and virtue and character in life, but also spiritual sanity. Jesus came to save the world, save sinners, but he will judge sinners in order to get us to think it again and think of him, that we need him, and turn to him so that he can give us eternal life. He is the way. Jesus came. The road to sanity then, spiritual sanity and eternal life, to immortality, is Jesus Christ. He's the way, the truth, and the life. No man can come to God the Father except by Christ. And he wants to save us, but we have to let go of our evil, our fleshly, lustly ways, which seem so exciting but are very destructive. I'm going to introduce now the two principal guests on this show today at Synod Hall on Education Day. Was Rose Tennant. She is familiar to you perhaps. She was Rose of Quinn and Rose radio talk show for years in southwestern Pennsylvania. You may know her from that venue. And the guest will be, the main guest, and she's the MC, and the main guest speaker will be Dr. Brian Donnelly, who in this show entitled Youth and the Sex Time Bomb, Dr. Bridie is going to tell you everything that you may have wanted to know about STDs but were afraid to ask. But first, Ruth, the Master of Ceremonies, Rose, she's going to tell her, what we call in the Christian world, her testimony, how she came to know God, what made her know God. And you'll hear in a minute that her story, what sobered her up was facing the death of one of the things was facing the death of her mother in her early 20s. She was faced with her own immorality. And that and some other events caused her to think seriously of life. And you need to do this. You need to get your eyes off of the exciting lies and myths about sex, about drugs and all these other things, these glittering things that are not gold, that the world distracts you with, and think seriously about life, in order to seek God. And the Bible says that if you seek me with all your heart, I will be found of you. So let's now go to Rose Tennant and hear her testimonial before she announces the main speaker.
I was about college age. I was around 23 when I gave my life to the Lord and decided to live for Him and to find out specifically what His unique destiny was for me. And at the time, I was finally living on my own. I was really excited about that. I was living in Oakmont, Pennsylvania, and unfortunately at that time, my mother was in the hospital dying of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So there was a dilemma. I hated leaving home, but at the same time I was young and I wanted to be out there on my own. But there was suddenly the idea of death now that was facing us. I was, in my mind, a very, very good person. But that thought was so strong. If I die, where do I go? And I couldn't answer that question. And that's when I decided, oh, I'm fighting to get out of here. And I did, and I made a deal with God at that moment. I said, I'll tell you what, if I get out of here, I'm going to find out how it is I can have peace about dying. And remember, too, I'm facing death here on the homestead, at the home front. My mom's passing away. Here I am suddenly, a young person, college age, just out of high school, a couple years, college age, and I am suddenly faced with my own mortality, something you never think about at that age. So as time went on, I started reading the Bible, and God led me to Cornerstone Television, where I was going to work eventually, but I didn't know that at the time. And I started to learn about God. And I gave my life to Him, and I wanted Him to control every part of my life, because I knew that I couldn't do that as well as He could. And I have to tell you that with its highs and with its lows, because you have both when you walk with God, with the highs and the lows, I never, ever regretted making that decision. And I believe that I am on a unique journey, as each and every one of us are. You know, I've been doing a Bible study in Esther lately, and if you read that book, it's just so amazing to me. It never mentions the word God in that book. Did you notice that? But it's all about God. It is all about God, and it's all about God's timing. And when we commit our lives to Him, He then is in charge of our time, in charge of our schedule, in charge of every aspect of our lives. And it's all about timing, and it's all about walking with God. And I can't imagine having made the journey that I've made without God by my side. It's been a tremendous, tremendous journey. There were times that I would look back to that day and think about how I should have stayed home that day. I thought about that. You know, I wanted to stay home. I was going to call in sick. I was never above calling in sick. But, and I sometimes would think, geez, I should have called in sick that day. No, I shouldn't have. No, I shouldn't have. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, Abby. And God uses all of that, and God uses everything that Abby's been through. It's a very painful journey for Abby, but I know that there's also joy because she sees how God has used her in great ways. And the same with Mary. I know that personally about Mary, how God has used Mary in great ways. But it's that destiny, it's that unique journey that is just ours to take. You can take it without God, or you can take it with God. I would not want to face a moment without God on that journey. That being said, I think it's time to eat, and that's a good part of the journey too. Thank you.
First, talk about the three different classes of STDs. The bacteria caused, the old-fashioned ones, the bacteria types like syphilis and gonorrhea, and then viruses, and then some which are neither, such as pubic lice and possibly even cancer. So let's go now and into hearing Dr. Brian Donnelly talking primarily in this segment about syphilis, the old-fashioned STD.
2014, by Pittsburgh offices in McCandless and Cranberry Township. It was Pittsburgh City Paper and the Cranberry Eagle newspaper that named him such. He was published in reviews of infectious diseases, contemporary pediatrics, contemporary OBGYN, and archives of pediatrics and adolescent medicine. He also authored articles for Lay Witness, Catholic Parent, and Pittsburgh Catholic. He's a fellow of American College of Pediatricians. He is the Secretary-Treasurer of Pittsburgh Guild of Catholic Medical Association, and he's also the president of Allegheny County Health Department Breastfeeding Coalition, and he has a lovely wife and 7 beautiful children, so he knows a thing or two about kids, too. So please welcome Dr. Brian Donley.
Thanks so much, Rose. It's nice to see you. And before we start, I think I have to apologize for some of the pictures, especially after you've eaten lunch. But I can go through them fast if you'd like, yes. All right, so everything you might have wanted to know, but might have been afraid to ask about sexually transmitted diseases. So what is a sexually transmitted disease? STD for short. What is STI? Sexually transmitted infection. So we set the definitions, the ground rules before we start. So an STD, infections that are acquired and transmitted by sexual contact. Although virtually any infection may be transmitted during intimate contact, the term sexually transmitted disease is restricted to conditions that are largely dependent on sexual contact for the transmission and propagation in a population. So a sexually transmitted infection, that would be an STD with or without symptoms. So it covers more possibilities. It's a little bit more general. There are some germs that can cause STDs that are asymptomatic, that people can carry and have no problems with, for a while anyway. And there are some that can cause damage to a fetus who didn't actually have sex. So there, you break it down into types. Bacterial, those are what most people think of, the old-fashioned type. Viral, and then neither. Bacterial, Treponema pallidum is a biological name for syphilis, or the organism that causes syphilis. Neisseria gonorrhea is GC for short. Haemophilus ducreae is another bacteria that can cause chancroid. There's another one, Klebsiella granulomatis, that causes granuloma inguinale. We'll talk more about these. Salmonella, Shigella, and then there's more, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But just in terms of prevalence, that's where the top 4 is where we can stop. The viral causes: herpes simplex virus, human immunodeficiency virus, and there's more in that category too, but that's the main one that we're worried about. Human papillomavirus, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and hepatitis A. And then neither. Chlamydia is neither a virus nor a bacteria. It's kind of in between. There are protozoa, which are a different category of germs, and those would cover Trichomonas, Centamoeba, Giardia, Cryptosporidium, and some other ones. And then this one, crabs. It's a ectoparasite, which means it lives as a parasite off of something outside, like skin. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. All right, so now syphilis, going from the less common to the more common. This is more common, again, what a lot of people think of when they think of STDs would be syphilis and gonorrhea. Syphilis is, there's primary, secondary, latent, and tertiary stages, depending on how the timing of when it's in the body. It's been a major public health problem since the 1500s. Cases have been increasing since 1980. There are about 400,000 cases a year. As a pediatrician, I'd be interested in congenital syphilis. If a pregnant mom contracts syphilis, it can get into the fetus and cause troubles, bone troubles, breathing troubles, brain troubles. It can affect the central nervous system as well, and it's potentially life-threatening for the baby. All right, here's one of those images I told you about. It shows up in the first stage, the primary stage, as a sore, like a crater. And that's often painful. It can appear elsewhere. If you catch it in the primary stage, you are most likely to cure it, to get rid of it, and not have any sequela. Secondary stage most often shows up as a rash all over the body, and that's what it typically looks like. It can occur on the palms and soles and all over, so it's good to know what you're dealing with. These days, some people might not know, might not recognize it, and then if you miss the secondary stage, and that's what I mentioned, it could progress to the tertiary stage, which could involve the heart and vascular system or the brain. All right, so the primary stage, we mentioned chancre. It disappears if you do nothing about it. The rash, or sometimes there's other ulcers in other parts of the body, that can last for weeks or months, and you are very infectious at that stage. The latency period, it kind of goes dormant, it hides. That can last months or years, and there's no symptoms during that stage. But again, it can lead to from the latency period, it can go into the tertiary stage, and that can be fatal, or cause brain damage and other things that would be pretty nasty.
We glory in the freedom of having a choice. It's something we fiercely defend. After all, it's how we control our destiny. Yet not all the choices we make are good for us, or for others. And so the true glory of any choice has always been measured by what happens as a result of it. A message from Life Choices.
Gonorrhea, or the clap, there's about 650,000 cases per year in the US. In males, it can cause urethritis, the urethra, where the urine exits the body from. It can be inflamed and painful when you go. There can be discharge. In females, cervicitis, the cervix can be inflamed, or there can be no symptoms. About 80% of the time, there's no symptoms in the female. If it goes untreated, PID, or pelvic inflammatory disease, where there's inflammation throughout the female reproductive tract, that can lead to sterility. And if a woman gets pregnant after that, it can lead to ectopic pregnancy because of the inflammation in the area where the egg doesn't go in the place where it's supposed to go. Again, as a pediatrician, neonatal gonorrhea can cause blindness in the baby. It's been routine for decades to apply antibiotic ointment in babies' eyes to try to prevent this. So. The resistance of this bacteria to the antibiotics that are used has become a huge problem. There are some strains that are resistant to virtually every antibiotic that's been tried against it. So if there are better, more powerful antibiotics coming down the road, we need them for this. All right. Again, I apologize. Cervicitis, this would be, again, if you see all the red, the inflammation. And you can get pharyngitis as well. So very red, and you can see the little broken blood vessels in there. I thought this was an interesting image. That's what it can feel like when you urinate. I can't find the commode, though. Sorry. All right. Chlamydia is an obligate intracellular parasite. That means it has to live inside another cell, or the cell of a different organism. It has to, obligate. And parasite means it lives off of that other creature. So about 3 million cases a year, so much more than the other ones that we talked about. In 75% of females and 50% of males, there are no symptoms. Again, if you have enough inflammation from it that goes undetected, under the radar, so to speak, you can develop pelvic inflammatory disease, infertility, and ectopic pregnancy, as we talked about before. younger females are more vulnerable. And that's kind of across the board the case. So adolescents in particular can be affected, again, can show no symptoms, and then develop infertility problems down the road. And again, lots of inflammation, and again, this could be undetected. The girl may not know that this is going on down there. Now this is the kind of thing you're not going to see. A girl's not going to know that she has it. So it's a funny image there. And then herpes, HSV, 45 million cases a year. So very common. Painful blisters, this would not be asymptomatic typically, very symptomatic. So people know when they have it. Latency period, the idea there is that you can have the initial outbreak, and then it goes away, you survive it, but it can come back. Now the subsequent outbreaks are also painful. They're usually not as painful as the first time around, but again, you know the once and future pain, it comes back. 40% of people with a primary infection get 6 or more relapses or outbreaks thereafter. So again, as a pediatrician, I'd be concerned about if the mom had herpes, she could pass it to the baby. It wouldn't have to be the primary case in mom. It could be a secondary case. It could be another relapse in mom. The baby can get it, and what we worry about would be herpes simplex encephalitis. Sometimes babies get rashes. Sometimes they don't, but it can affect the brain and could actually be fatal. What's different, a little bit different than the other ones, or at least from previously, from years before, there are treatments, there are antiviral medicines that can help. Usually they help the most with the first outbreak. They're not quite as effective with the relapses. And that's, again, for a baby, the treatment can be life-saving. And that's what that would look like. And it can also affect the eye. And if you can see, there's even part of the iris is involved as well. So it can be pretty destructive. And then the mouth. So again, sorry for the post-lunch thing. So cancer. Why is that here? Is cancer a sexually transmitted disease? Well, if people have heard about HPV, human papillomavirus, back some years ago, about 10 years ago, there were studies that were looking at the prevalence of this virus, the HPV virus, in the lesions that women had who had cervical cancer. They would take those lesions that were removed, and they would test them for human papillomavirus. 97-98% of them had HPV. So there was some, circumstantial evidence. And it tends to be the case, the more of those viruses you're in contact with, and the more exposure you get to that, the more likely you are to develop cervical cancer. It's also been shown in head and neck cancer, so cancer of the inside of the mouth or the tongue that young people can get, in non-smoking people, so you can't blame the cigarettes. If you, again, test those lesions, you can find HPV in a lot of those, and it's not on here, but anal cancer as well has become an issue for MSM, men who have sex with men. So anal sex can also contribute to the incidence of anal cancer, and it's thought to be the HPV virus. So,
welcome back, everyone. In the following segment, Dr. Donnelly is going to be talking about the implications that STDs and the policies today have for the way they are being treated. The one implication he'll point out that has taken place in people's minds due to the liberal propaganda of the last 40 years, where pregnancy is thought of a choice instead of a life. Caught up in this momentum of choice is pregnancy has come to be regarded as a kind of a disease instead of the birth of a child. It's really an amazing change in our thinking that has taken. He's going to tell you how this has affected prevention of disease and the drastic changes it's made in treatment.
That's a probable yes. That type of cancer does seem to be sexually related, so via that virus. So modes of transmission, how do we get these diseases? Semen, vaginal secretions, and blood. I kind of put those all in there. Gonorrhea, yes, transmitted through those secretions. Syphilis, yes. Hepatitis B, yes. It's primarily through blood, and there is some sexual connection there. Hepatitis C, definitely through semen and vaginal secretions, and HIV as well. I put a star there. A couple of weeks ago, there was the first reported case of woman-to-woman transfer of HIV, which I don't know if you guys had heard of. So, and then cutaneous, and this I think is underappreciated. That means skin to skin. So the one person being close to the next, you don't have to have any kind of semen or vaginal secretion transfer. So HSV, that's herpes, HPV, the human papillomavirus, chlamydia, the lymphogranuloma venereum, and chancroid, they're all by contact. And then the bottom part, stool transmission, before AIDS. This wasn't on the map, essentially. But hepatitis A, salmonella, entamoeba, cryptosporidium, giardia. Look in the intestinal tract for germs, and you can find some that could be considered sexually transmitted disease because of the men having sex with men phenomenon. Right, because it can be transmitted through saliva as well. Back in the 80s, before there was a test called the PCR, polymerase chain reaction test, there was about 20% unknown, people who didn't have those kind of connections, either the blood or the sexual connection to get the hepatitis B disease. There were people in nursing homes and daycare centers who contracted HSV, or the hepatitis B virus, and it was unknown why. With better techniques, it was determined, yes, there is the risk from saliva. So a baby in a daycare center can be exposed and can pick up the hepatitis B virus, but most likely at that age, they're going to be a carrier, so nobody's going to know that they have it. They're not going to get sick. And then as a carrier, later on, they can develop symptoms, and actually the more common thing they would develop would be chronic active hepatitis, and that would sometimes cause liver failure.
Well, do you think then the reason we're doing this so young is because so many of our kids are being taken care of by people they might not really have it? I mean, it seems to me, if you knew the family members did not have hepatitis B, there wouldn't be a problem. But you're saying they could go someplace and somebody could come up and give them a kiss, and they could be at risk. Am I hearing that right?
What you said the first time, yes. If your baby's going to be taken care of by a daycare center or something that you don't know, then the risk would be higher, sure. If you don't have hepatitis or the hepatitis B virus infection yourself, and nobody that the baby's going to be around has it, then it's unlikely that they'll contract it, right? So, yeah, from a public health perspective, that's the idea, to try to protect the babies who are going to be exposed that way.
Thank you.
So implications of the previous, barrier protection has its limitations. And like I mentioned, cutaneous, the skin-to-skin contact is underrated. The phenomenon of anal sex increases the number and variety of germs involved. The anus and the rectum are designed for excretion, not intromission. So what are the political implications? There's politics versus public health. So if we want to prevent these diseases, we could throw condoms at it, which is being done. People talk about vaccination. There's Gardasil and Cervarix. Gardasil has 4 of the strains of HPV in it, and Cervarix has 2 of those strains. 2 of the strains in Gardasil, they're the same as the Cervarix. They are designed to prevent the strains that, if you do the numbers, you add them up, 70% of the known cases of cervical cancer are from those strains of HPV. And there are about 100 strains of HPV out there. So I don't know what that's going to do in the long run. I think it's going to, if more people get vaccinated, those strains are not going to be a problem. There's a saying, nature abhors a vacuum. Other strains might move in and cause the trouble. So, and then there's this. Contraception and the multiplication effect. If you're not afraid of pregnancy, if that's taken out of the equation and you're going to have sex more because you don't worry about being pregnant, and it feels good, and the failure rate of the method is only 3%, and that's what the, what's the word? The best estimates of the methods out there, 3%. Will you participate in the activity more frequently? Did I mention it feels good? Yes. I think that's what goes on. I think people don't realize that when they look at that. Maybe 3% in the best circumstance, if you use that method of prevention as well as you're going to, when you're sitting and you're thinking it out. But in the heat of the moment, in the heat of passion, you don't always think that way. So the 3% may not be 3% after all. All right, I throw this in the hygiene I mentioned before, the crabs. There's a trend, shaving the pubic hair among young people. The incidence of the human pediculosis, the crabs, has gone down, and there might be a connection. So, now, foolproof. Are any of these prevention methods foolproof? I think that's self-evident. Yeah, nothing would be foolproof other than right, or if a virgin married a virgin, right, then you wouldn't have to worry about any of those things. All right, so treatment. We lost in the prevention department. There are antibacterial treatments. Some are losing their effectiveness. I mentioned the strains of gonorrhea that are out there. Chlamydia also, some of them are not as sensitive to the medications that are usually used. Now, again, if you do treat somebody, it doesn't work, and you have something that is often asymptomatic, and it's out there. You don't really have that good control over that. The antiviral treatments, they're not nearly as good as the antibacterials. They can kind of ameliorate some of the symptoms, but it's not like you can kill it so much. Antiprotozoals, those are tough. I put legendary side effects. Back in the day, they used different poisons, essentially, when people were sick with the protozoa. The idea was if you took enough of this poison and you survived, and the bug didn't, then you win. And then lasers. That's what, a late 20th century, 21st century kind of thing. More powerful than the laser pointer. That treats cervical cancer and just kind of cuts and gets rid of it. So if anybody feels like that, again, I apologize. A lot of science to throw at you. But.
Welcome back again, everyone. In this last segment, Dr. Donnelly is going to be talking about the politics of the treatment today and the epidemiologists, I believe they call it, and the politics of the way things have changed, and the harm it's doing to public health, the harm that making birth control readily available to everybody, the harm this is doing to the epidemiology of STDs, and it's the price of our change in our political view away from the sanity, what I have called to you the sanity of the Ten Commandments morality. We're experiencing, our world is going awry with greater increasing troubles because it's in moral freefall deterioration away from God and his Ten Commandments.
All right. So epidemiology and politics. Historically, public health efforts have been brought to bear on individuals to prevent and treat sexually transmitted diseases. So kind of a community-wide thing. There was an old principle to treat both partners. Well, in the age of AIDS, that's kind of gone by the wayside there. And recently, government has pushed to cover contraception and abortion with tax money.
Why in the age of AIDS has that gone by the wayside?
Sorry?
Why in the age of AIDS has treating both partners
Politics. That's affected the whole thing, the whole public health approach.
You said the public health approach was to treat both partners, but with AIDS, we're not doing that as much.
Yes, correct.
Why?
The concept that there's individual freedom, that the individual's right to do whatever they want is more important than the community-wide protection. I'm just a messenger.
Well, and I think that's a new thing in the social work field too that's up and coming with sorry, I'm not saying that, with reporting and, you know, being required to report if somebody comes across who are HIV positive, and you have to tell people, and if you don't, then there's legal. And that's all in the, none of that, well, at least here in Pennsylvania, is required at this point.
Right, but it's not, it's different than, a different approach than previous. So at what price, I usually don't read this. Vanity Fair magazine. I don't know why, yeah. But if anybody's interested, they can find that online. This tells the story of one young woman in particular, and then there's a couple others that they talk about in the article. But it focuses on the one who is an athlete. I don't remember exactly what she did, but and they talk about another one who is a soldier, but both very active and healthy. The picture of health, so to speak. They were using NuvaRing, which is a ring that goes over the cervix, and it excretes over time small amounts of third-generation estrogen, desostrogel. She had, with the woman in the story, pulmonary emboli, and she survived, but barely. She had a life-threatening event, and she was saved, and she had no idea that it could have been from the contraceptive device that had been placed. The article talks about the lawsuits that have been filed, and then other people who were involved, some healthy young women who had strokes, some had heart attacks. That's kind of more the thrust of the article, the lawsuits. But I don't know. To me, I've heard other reports, and I've seen other cases of women who have had diseases that we didn't have to worry about in young, healthy people before that are sex-related because of contraception, because of doing what they can do to avoid pregnancy. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard this. In the year 2001, the EPA put estrogen on the carcinogen list. They have different groups. Group 1 means that it's a known human carcinogen. And they put estrogen on there based on the studies of medical studies, women getting estrogen who developed mostly breast cancer. Now, If you go look it up, it says that there is some protection against ovarian cancer, but ovarian cancer is much less common than breast cancer. So, again, that's underappreciated. The Affordable, in quotes, Care Act, contraceptives are free. Well, they're not really free. Somebody pays for them. There's no such thing as a free lunch, really, but if they are free to somebody else, right, they're more likely to use them. And I mentioned the multiplication effect, right? If you don't have to worry about pregnancy, then you're more likely to have sex more often. And the STD link, there are studies that show that women who are on oral contraceptive pills are more likely to contract sexually transmitted diseases. Did I mention it feels good? So the most powerful sexual organ, again, underrated. All right. And this I have to mention. This is not a sexually transmitted disease. It's a matter of anthropology. And if you read the Affordable Care Act, pregnancy is treated like a sexually transmitted disease, which is a shame. But there's a Macedonian woman from the 20th century. She actually won the Nobel Peace Prize. But if you remember nothing else from what I said, remember this. A child is God's gift to the family. Each child is created in the special image and likeness of God for greater things, to love and be loved. And for bonus points, anybody know who said that? There we go. Good job. All right, questions? I can't answer this one. It's classified. Yes?
What do you think it will take? Is there a tipping point where people will actually realize what's going on and change behavior? Behavior changes all the time, but can you see a tipping point coming? Can you see people sort of waking up to this? I mean, STDs, the prevalence of them, in your practice, can you see people sort of waking up?
I think, I don't know if it has to get dark, right? It's the darkest before the dawn kind of thing. I think with the, again, Affordable Care Act, if there's more birth control pill use, sexually transmitted diseases are going to increase. I think that's going to take, again, that article in Vanity Fair was something of a surprise to me, that they would cover that. But again, they focus more on the lawsuit aspect. Yeah, I think more bad things have to happen. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question, yeah.
Doctor, on the one slide you had chlamydia, that young women were more vulnerable. Why?
The reproductive tract is immature, so it's less likely to protect itself. The cells are just not as hardy, maybe. That's the best theory for that. But just in terms of exposure to chlamydia, if a young woman is exposed, say, once or twice, compared to a woman who's older, she's more likely to have problems and to get colonized. But I think it comes down to maturity.
So does your reproductive organs get, like, immunity somehow as you get older?
Sure. Oh, sure, yeah. But the local immune system gets more mature, gets tougher, I guess. Anyone else? All right. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, and I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Take my hand, precious Lord.